You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussion, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Wednesday. Well, we're in for a ride. This is going to be interesting. So we're talking about a recent mass by an Italian priest who held a mass in the sea with an inflatable altar, who's, of course, being criticized for this. I want to talk about that. Then I want to compare what was done liturgically to canon law, to the general instruction of the Roman Missal, and to Sacrosanctum Concilium from the Second Vatican Council. And we're going to consider whether or not this liturgy is what the Second Vatican Council and the rubrics of the Novus Ordo permits and envisions. And we're going to do that in light of a video by Taylor Marshall, who comments on this and suggests that, yes, this is because of Vatican II that we have these liturgies. So we're going to examine that critically. First, I want to look at the article reporting this with the priest. Then we will look at those resources. And then finally, we will watch the video of Taylor Marshall and I'll interact with it. Now, I want to share my screen so that you can follow along with me. Please let me know if y'all have any difficulty seeing it. Italian priest holds mass in the sea with an inflatable altar, criticized. Well, rightly so. Mattia Bernasconi said he planned to hold Sunday's ceremony among the trees by the beach in Crotone, southern Italy, after a week-long youth camp, but the spot was taken by another group. An Italian Catholic priest apologized Wednesday after being criticized for celebrating Mass in the sea using an inflatable mattress as an altar. I am glad that he has apologized for this, because there's certainly reason to apologize, as we're going to see. But at least he is taking the position of humility and apologizing for this act of sacrilege. It seems that his heart was in the right place. I don't know where his mind was, but his heart was at least in the right place. But I'm glad to see the apology. However, I will note that people who are reporting on this, a lot of them aren't mentioning that apology. And I think it counts for something. It doesn't necessarily make up for it all, but it does at least show us that the individual wasn't trying to go against the church and trying to be sacrilegious. Mattia said he planned to hold Sunday's ceremony among the trees, but the spot was taken by another group. With no other shade available from the searing heat, a family nearby offered the use of the mattress, and the priest took to the water, conducting the service with everyone, himself included, in swimsuits. In response to a photo of the mass published by local media, the Archdiocese of Crotone hailed the commitment of the young people involved, but said there must be certain standards. Right. So the Archdiocese is not condoning this, and it shouldn't. While Mass can be held outside, it is necessary to maintain that minimum of decorum and attention to the symbols required by the very nature of liturgical celebrations, the diocese said. In a response published online Wednesday, the priest from Milan defended his actions while apologizing for any offense. It was absolutely not my intention to trivialize the Eucharist. It was simply the Mass at the end of a work week, he said. And look, I think it's good that he's explaining he wasn't trying to trivialize the Eucharist. It was good that he is not trying to engage in sacrilege. He's apologizing. Although defending the actions still at the end of the day, I don't think should be done. But at least he is apologizing. But the symbols are strong, it's true, and they speak sometimes in a different way than we would like. It is naive of me not to give them due weight, he added. Right. Especially considering the fact that a lot of people are going to be scandalized by this, and they're going to have the wrong impression. And it does not properly respect our Lord in the Eucharist. Now, I don't have a problem in certain cases having a liturgy done outside if it's done respectfully and reverently. according to the norms of the church. However, this wasn't. So that, I think, ultimately is the problem. Now, let's actually look at what the church itself says. Let's look at the Code of Canon Law. Canon 932, paragraph 1 and 2. The Eucharistic celebration is to be carried out in a sacred place unless, in a particular case, necessity requires otherwise. In such a case, the celebration must be done in a decent place. And I think common sense tells us, yeah, this wasn't exactly a decent place. The Eucharistic sacrifice must be carried out on a dedicated and blessed altar. Outside a sacred space, a suitable table can be used, not a floaty. A table can be used, always with a cloth or a corporal. Again, a table, not a floaty. But to be honest, do we really need canon law to tell us this? I mean, isn't it common sense? I think if we just use common sense, we don't even need canon law. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's use for canon law. I'm just saying, if you use common sense and you're just being respectful, I think it's pretty clear what is okay and what is not okay. But that's just me. That's just me. All right. Let's also look at the general instruction of the Roman Missal. What do the actual rubrics tell us? Well, let's see. Places should be arranged with appropriate care for the faithful so that they're able to participate in the sacred celebrations visually and spiritually in the proper manner. Well, I would say the setting that I saw, no shirt on, floaty altar table. Yeah, visually and spiritually, I don't think that's really proper. And again, I think common sense tells you that. So do the actual rubrics and does the germ really allow for this? I don't think so. I don't think so. But do we really need the germ to tell us, hey, don't use a floaty? Hey, keep your shirt on? Do we really need the germ to tell us that? Or is this sufficient? I think this is sufficient. But some say, but no, Vatican II allows for this kind of abuse. Does it? Does it? Here's some general norms that Vatican II's document Sacrum Sanctum Concilium on the reform of the liturgy gives us. Therefore, no other person, even if he be a priest, may add, remove, or change anything in the liturgy on his own authority. According to what we just saw from canon law, and according to what we just saw from the germ, I would certainly say that the priest, on his own authority, changed some things. And I'm glad he apologized. But at the end of the day, this was wrong. I don't think this should be defended. But you can't say that the rubrics allows for it, canon law allows for it, Vatican II allowed for it. Nonsense. No, it doesn't. And more importantly, I don't think common sense allows for it. Again, common sense goes a long way. All right, let's watch the video by Taylor Marshall. He is going to tell us about his thoughts in reference to this sacrilegious liturgy. Here we go.
It's on my nightstand right now. I'm reading it again. It's Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre's book called Open Letter to Confused Catholics. I didn't know there was an audio book, but apparently there is. This is written by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, who I think is a saint. And if you want to throw bricks at me over it, whatever, why don't you just go and look at this?
All right. So first I would say, I remember when I first read the Open Letter by Lefebvre. It was probably in, 2014, 2015. I remember reading it thinking, man, he's spot on. He's dead on and everything. And although he does have some legitimate concerns and legitimate points, I don't necessarily think in hindsight, looking back at it, having learned more about the faith, that he was spot on and everything. Take a look at this. This is from the Society's website, where they have a copy of it available online. It's on page 15 of their PDF document. I have it in actual paperback, but I wanted to show it to you visually on the screen. Here's what he says. Lefebvre says, the new Mass, even when said with piety and respect for the liturgical rules, is subject to the same reservation since it is impregnated with the spirit of Protestantism. Did you hear that? So even when it's said piously and according to the rules, so according to the rubric, so it's not being done as a liturgical abuse. It's actually being done properly as prescribed by the church. It's impregnated with Protestantism. It bears within it a poison harmful to the faith. Now, I just did a video responding to this and this error that Lefebvre maintains. And this is poisonous. This is actually harmful. His actual content that he's presenting is what's poisonous and harmful. Because you can't say that a liturgy promulgated by the church universally is harmful to souls. And again, I demonstrated that in a previous video. I'll link it in the show description here after this posts or after we're done with it live. So I'll put it in the show notes. You can go and watch it. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here, but that is a theological error. That is a position that is censored, that is not traditional, and that is also harmful to souls. Because at the end of the day, the society is using that to say you can't go to a Novus Ordo, even if it's done reverently, respectfully, and according to the rubrics. You cannot go to it. You should stay at home and pray the rosary. And I will link that video as well where they say that. That's harmful. That's keeping people away from Christ. That's the work of Satan, because at the end of the day, even though I know that's not their intention, that's keeping people away from God's grace and the sacraments. Again, that's the work of Satan. So that's a poison harmful to souls. So though he lauds this book, I want to warn people that there's some problems in it, even though there's actually some things in there I would agree with. He's criticizing some legitimate concerns in some cases. However, you add just a little bit of poison to something good, it's still destructive, and it's even more harmful than something that's just outright wrong, like Father James Martin, because it comes to you under the guise of piety and tradition, but it destroys your soul if you buy into it. So I think that that's certainly problematic. That's just one problem in the open letter. There's many others, but let's continue with the video. He tells us, all right, well, you know what? I'm promoting the Society of St. Pius X and Lefebvre. I think he's a saint. And if you have a problem with that, go look at this. What? I don't affirm what the priest did here, although I'm happy he apologized. And I'm glad to see that. I don't affirm that mass. I think that that's wrong. I also think it's incredibly exceptional. That's not how masses are normally done. But I'm not defending that. I think it's wrong. But just because you don't defend that, and just because you think it's wrong, doesn't mean that we need to now defend everything Lefebvre said, and he's somehow a saint now. Now, he may have been a holy man. He may have been well-intentioned. But does that mean that he is right in everything that he did? That doesn't logically follow. But what he presents to you is either you think that this is okay, or you reject it and accept Lefebvre. That does not logically follow. That's really bad reasoning. Let's continue.
I'm a Catholic dad. How could I ever expose my children to this?
Well, I agree. I don't think that we should expose our children to that. I sure wouldn't expose my children to it. I wouldn't participate in a liturgy like that. However, how does that prove the case for Lefebvre, which is what we just heard? Again, it doesn't logically follow.
Well, Vatican II, no, whatever.
Vatican II. Did you hear it? He wants to say this is defended by Vatican II, or he's implying that some people will say this was defended by Vatican II. Either way. Either way, he's wrong and he's misleading people. Because anybody who were to say that Vatican II defends this doesn't know what they're talking about, as I just showed. And if he's saying that Vatican II actually defends it, he's also wrong and he's misleading people. Vatican II doesn't defend this. Canon law doesn't defend it. The Germ doesn't defend it. Sanctum Concilium doesn't defend it. Common sense doesn't defend it. But he just implied that either it's defended by Vatican II or people are going to say it's defended by Vatican II. Who are these people? Who would be so irrational as to say that? And I would love to know what their source is for that claim if they do say, hey, Vatican II defends this. Really? Where?
That's not holy. That's a sacrilege. That's blasphemy.
Right. And I agree that that is sacrilege. But again, I'm not sure how Vatican II has, anything to do with this.
Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre wrote this book, Open Letter to Confused Catholics,
where he denigrates the liturgy of the church as it's officially promulgated and then indicts the church and its liturgical reforms as they're officially promulgated, not abuses. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind in light of the video that I've done showing that this is problematic.
He saw the desecration, the sacrilege.
So it's true that he saw sacrilege. It's true he saw liturgical abuses and irreverence. And I, along with Lefebvre, I'm right there with Lefebvre in saying that's wrong. I'm right there with him. The problem is it does not follow then that the liturgy done properly and reverently, as he said, is harmful to souls and poisonous. That is where, okay, but that doesn't logically follow. So just because we might be sympathetic to what he's saying as far as liturgical abuses, it doesn't mean we have to buy into everything that Lefebvre is saying. And you also notice he mentioned here theological errors. So the magisterium evidently is promulgating theological errors. Let's hear what they are.
Their irreverence, but also the theological errors of saying that every single religion has a right from God. No, it does not.
That is not what Vatican II taught. It does teach that every individual has a right not to be coerced. That's true. But it doesn't teach what he just said, that it has a right before God. That is misrepresenting the Second Vatican Council, just as Taylor Marshall does that elsewhere in accusing Nostra Aetate of teaching Pelagianism. So it's ironic that Taylor Marshall wants to talk about theological error, but then he commits theological error whenever he accuses an ecumenical council of teaching heresy. That's a theological error. That's a problematic position. And he's also misrepresenting Vatican II to begin with. It's not what it teaches. So I want to say, look, this, at the end of the day, this is not an honest treatment of Vatican II. Why do this? Why confuse souls with this kind of impious and erroneous theology and misrepresentation of Vatican II? And why do it with people who are already vulnerable? The people who are watching his show and are watching this and buying into it are people who are already vulnerable. They're disturbed emotionally by what's taking place with abuses, and that's understandable. I'm right there with them. We've all been there. We're all disturbed by it, as we should be. It shouldn't sit well with you. But these are people who are emotionally vulnerable, and many of them aren't catechized well enough to know and recognize and spot the errors that Taylor Marshall is now presenting to them. So he's capitalizing on people who are already in a vulnerable position to accept whatever he says, because they're telling him, or he's telling them, hey, you're right to be disturbed by this. But then he feeds them with poison. That's a problem.
That cannot be true. Previous popes contradicted that.
It certainly isn't true, but that's also a misrepresentation of Vatican II. Although there's no engagement here on part of Taylor Marshall when it comes to the theological weight of Dignitatis Humanae, for example, versus the pontificate and teachings of in the encyclicals of Leo the 13th or Gregory the 16th. I don't think that there's a contradiction between them, but I'm just saying, let's say that there was. Let's say that Vatican II actually was opposing what some of these popes said. He has no ability to engage the question of, okay, well, if you have this kind of differences in the non-definitive teachings of the church, to which do you assent? The older one or the newer one? Is it that simple? No, I've shown already it's not that simple. If you had a scenario like this, which I don't think this is one of them, but if you had a scenario where two popes or council or pope or something like that are teaching contradictory things at a non-definitive level, which one do you assent to? I've gone over this at length, and it's not as simplistic as he presents it to you. You don't just simply go with, well, what did the popes previously say? That does not answer the question of which one has the greater theological weight. So no engagement with that, just completely sidesteps it and just says, hey, look, Vatican II is going contrary to the popes. Again, I don't think that Vatican II contradicts those popes. He misrepresented Vatican II anyway. That even if it does, his position still doesn't logically follow.
That the revered holy sacrifice of the Mass in the Roman Rite needs to be revised so that this kind of stuff can happen?
Okay, so yeah, there were some aspects that needed to be revised in the liturgy. I mean, Look, it's fact that there were some aspects to the traditional Latin Mass that itself was an innovation, itself was a revision. The TLM did not fall down from heaven, in some kind of missile or something. It's like people who say, well, you can't adjust anything to the King James version of the Bible, as if Paul was speaking the King James version of the Bible. Paul was not celebrating the TLM. So there have been some changes made to the TLM throughout the years, and Vatican II was right to try to reverse some of those innovations of the TLM. We can debate whether or not that's been successful. We can debate some of them, but that's what the Council Fathers were doing. They weren't saying that, hey, these beach liturgies with a floaty is okay. That's not what Vatican II was saying when it said it needed to reform some things of the liturgy. Just read Sacrosanctum Concilium and you'll see that.
That the revered holy sacrifice of the Mass in the Roman Rite needs to be revised so that this kind of stuff can happen?
You heard that? So he's now suggesting that the Vatican II fathers were trying to reform the liturgy so that this can happen. Why misrepresent the Catholic Church so badly like this? Why denigrate the Council Fathers? Why misrepresent the Church and the Magisterium so badly? Canon law so badly? The germ, Sacrosanctum Concilium. Why misrepresent the Church so badly? To straw man it like this and say, you know what? You guys wanted to reform the liturgy. What? So that we can have this? Who is seriously suggesting that? Who is really saying that this is okay? And this is what the Council Fathers want, and that this is what canon law allows for, and that this is what the general instruction on the Roman Missal wants and intends? Who could seriously argue that? So to present that, again, is just empty rhetoric. It's dishonest. It's misleading. And again, it's misleading people who are already vulnerable and now disposed to what he's saying because they're rightly upset that there's liturgical abuse happening.
Very confusing. Very irreverent. Yeah, but Taylor, we could just do the Novus Ordo in like a reverent ad orientem way. They don't want that. Why is it that 99% of the time or more, it's not ad orientem?
Well, first of all, I want to know why this person that Taylor Marshall is imitating sounds like Napoleon Dynamite. I mean, that's my question. Now, look, it is true that there are plenty of Novus Ordo priests that don't want ad orientem, and that's a problem. And I think that we need to challenge them and help them better understand the purpose of ad orientem. I think if they better understood the reason why that is an apostolic human tradition, they would realize, you know what, this is actually good. We really should be doing ad orientem. Now, some would push back and still say, no, I'm not in favor of that. But I think a lot of them, if they were just catechized a little bit better and they understood, it's not that you're turning your back to the people. Here's what this is. You're awaiting and you're expecting the coming of Christ who returns in the East. That's what's going on with ad orientem facing the East, liturgical East. I think if people understood that a little bit better, they would be a little bit more disposed to ad orientem. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate that we don't have more ad orientem masses. So I'm 100% in agreement with criticizing those who think that ad orientem is bad or devalue its importance. I'm right there in agreement with Taylor Marshall, but that doesn't mean that anything he has said follows. And it doesn't mean that, well, we should just abandon this idea of trying to have a reverent Novus Ordo because some people don't want to do the liturgy ad orientem. Look, I mean, if the Novus Ordo is done according to the rubrics, it's still going to be incredibly reverent. I think it's unfortunate if it's versus populum. I think we're taking something away. But at the same time, I don't think that it's going to be harmful to souls. It's not irreverent. It's not sinful. But it's certainly not giving us the greatest beauty that it could. And I think in that sense, it could be criticized. But again, his criticism of the Novus Ordo doesn't logically follow. And that's what I'm trying to bring out here. It's also 99% of the time not this at the beach with a floaty with a priest with his shirt off. So if we're going to talk about unicorn liturgies, why are you using a unicorn liturgy to somehow denigrate the Novus Ordo? That's my question.
99% of the time or more, it's not ad orientem reverent with Gregorian chant in Latin. They don't want it that way.
I don't think it's 99% of the time, but I do think it's an overwhelming amount. I do think the vast majority of Novus Ordo liturgies are done versus populum. Why is it? I think bad catechesis a lot of times. Sometimes I think that there's probably some Novus Ordo priests who have a bias towards certain liturgical forms, and I think that that's wrong. I think that there's some older, especially the older generation priests, that have reacted against more traditional forms of the Roman Rite for whatever reason, that they interpret ad orientem as something bad. And I think that that's unfortunate. I don't know if they had a bad experience with a priest who was traditional. They probably did, but it doesn't follow that that then means that you need to have non-traditional Roman Rite liturgies just because somebody who was traditional offended you or did something wrong or was mean to you. I've talked to a lot of people who don't like the Latin Mass because it was a Latin Mass priest who was horrible to them. Oh, well, look, I mean, I understand that there were some really mean priests before, but it doesn't logically follow just because a Latin Mass priest back in the day was mean to you that makes the Latin Mass wrong, or it makes ad orientem wrong, or it makes Latin wrong. You have to be able to distinguish between those things there. But I think a lot of people don't distinguish. They just associate that negativity with these more traditional forms of the Roman Rite. And so they're reacting against it, just like some of these rad trads like Taylor Marshall are reacting against the liberals. Both of them are in reactionary mode. And I want to say both of y'all are wrong. I mean, those who are denigrating the Latin Mass, you're wrong. And those of you who are putting down the Novus Ordo as it's done properly, you're also wrong. Y'all are both two sides of the same coin. You're both having a liturgical theology that is informed based on being reactionary rather than based on what's true and what's good. Now, I think it's good that we would have ad orientem. So I'm going to defend that and say, look, this idea of versus populum, I just don't see any good reason to have it. I think we need to start phasing that out and returning to ad orientem. At the same time, I'm not going to go so far as to say, if you don't do it, your liturgy's evil, it's sinful, it's impious. That doesn't follow either.
Yeah, but Taylor, we could just do the Novus Ordo in like a reverent ad orientem way. They don't want that.
They? Who's they? Some people don't want it that way. There's plenty of Novus Ordo priests who do want it that way. I don't think that it's as clear cut as he indicates here. There's certainly a mixed bag here. But again, I do have concerns for somebody who's in the Novus Ordo, who is a priest who is opposed to Gregorian chant, who is opposed to ad orientem, who's opposed to any use of Latin. I would ask why. What's wrong? Why are you out of step here with Sacrosanctum Concilium? What's your motivation here? Sometimes I think, again, it's due to bad catechesis on part of the priest. Sometimes it's because of a bias of a bad experience they had with something that's traditional. And I think we need to address that in the same way that we need to address radical traditionalists who go too far in their criticisms of the Novus Ordo. Both of those need to be engaged. This is why I said, look, I don't think that Traditionis Custodes is being consistent. I don't think the Holy Father, with all due respect, he's being consistent here. He decries liturgical abuse in the document on both sides, but then he only puts teeth behind and he only gives disciplinary measures to radical traditionalists. But wait, we need to do that with those who are abusing the Novus Ordo too. We need to put teeth behind that. We need to actually start implementing some discipline against those who are going into liturgical abuse in the Novus Ordo, because I think that's probably more prevalent than radical traditionalists who have schismatic tendencies like Taylor Marshall. I mean, I know there's a handful of them, but I think there's probably more people in the Novus Ordo who are abusing the Novus Ordo. Now, I might be wrong. I haven't done a poll. I'm just giving you my impression of things. Although I will say the rad trad camp sure seems to be growing in numbers.
I know you might be in a place, I'm going to hear it from you in the comments, and that's great. Hey, at our church, it's ad orientem, we got an altar rail, and Father's very reverent, and etc. That's the exception. In almost every one of those places that has the unicorn Novus Ordo, they're also saying the Latin Mass before or after it, because the father, the priest, has habituated himself to say the traditional Latin Mass, and he's taking that devotion and piety and pouring it into the Novus Ordo. But on its own, in the Novus Ordo, over the decades, we see an erosion of piety and an erosion of devotion.
I don't think that it's that rare. I know certain forms of the Novus Ordo. I mean, yeah, they might be pretty rare, but just a generally speaking, reverently done Novus Ordo, according to the liturgical rubrics of the church, those aren't that uncommon. Now, when you start putting certain additional stipulations beyond the rubrics, well, it also has to have an altar rail, it also has to have these other things. Well, those things might be good, but are they absolutely necessary for a reverent liturgy is the question. No, they're not. Although they might be good, they might be helpful, they might be conducive for it, they're not absolutely necessary for a reverent liturgy. In other words, you could have a Novus Ordo that does everything right, but if it doesn't have an altar rail, does that mean somehow that this is an irreverent liturgy? No, that's not what that means. Should they maybe get an altar rail? Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, I'm all for sacred space and guarding sacred space and having clear, visible marks indicating that sacred space. I think that is a good thing. So I'm all in favor of altar rails in the Roman Rite. For the Eastern liturgies, obviously, I think you need an iconostasis, but the idea is the same, that you would guard that sacred space. Without being too legalistic about it. So I'm all in favor of it. But just because you don't have that, does that mean it's irreverent? So I think he might be setting the standards for reverent Novus Ordo too high. And that's why he calls it a unicorn Novus Ordo.
But on its own, in the Novus Ordo, over the decades, we see an erosion of piety and an erosion of devotion.
And the question is why? Is it because of the actual instruction of the Roman Missal itself? Or is it because of other factors? I think it's because of other factors. So I don't think it's because of what the Catholic Church has officially promulgated. Although I will say what it's officially promulgated has not done enough to fight against that. So I'm going to concede that. I think that there's more that we could do in what has been promulgated in the post-conciliar era to fight against these kinds of abuses. To be fair, however, the church has issued plenty of liturgical documents condemning liturgical abuses and giving further instruction. But when it comes to implementing them and disciplining those who go against them, I think we could do more. I think ultimately that's where it is. When you have a failure to correct liturgical abuse, people feel like, well, it's not that big of a deal. So it just continues to get worse and worse and worse. But you would have this same problem if all you had was the Latin Mass as well in the Roman Rite. If people are not disposed to do things properly and with sacredness and with reverence, they're going to do the Latin Mass in the way that they abuse the Novus Ordo as well. So the problem is to fix their understanding of what they're doing. And Vatican II calls for that. But again, at the end of the day, if people don't properly do that, they don't have that understanding, we do need to have church discipline. So I think ultimately a lack of discipline and disciplinary measures is why it continues to be eroded in the Novus Ordo. Also, those who are cognizant of these things tend to leave the Novus Ordo and go to the TLM. And look, I mean, I totally understand that if you have a really bad Novus Ordo in your area, that you would leave and go to the TLM. I've done that before. I've driven a very long time just to go to a TLM whenever I had a really, really bad Novus Ordo. So I totally understand that. But that also plays a factor as to why the Novus Ordo is getting worse and the TLM doesn't seem to be getting worse. That plays a factor. Those who are aware of these things tend to gravitate to the TLM, understandably. It's completely understandable, and I'm not criticizing that, but I'm just saying that factors in. So it doesn't logically follow that just because you have an erosion in the Novus Ordo, that it's because of what has been officially promulgated about the Novus Ordo. I think that it's more complex than that.
It's time to scrap this. I mean, is that a cup holder? What is that? Oh, and why isn't Father genuflecting like a priest? Because he's standing in an ocean.
No, I think in the Roman Rite they should genuflect, but genuflecting in and of itself is not an act of, or is not a mark of what is holy and pious, of course, because in the Eastern churches we don't have that in all liturgical contexts. But I will say in the Roman Rite, I do think that the priest should genuflect, and if he's unable to genuflect, show some other sign of reverence. So I'm in agreement with that, but I don't. But this is where I kind of think he goes a little too far with it. But whatever, that's a small issue. The bigger issue is he's showing this to show people, to get them emotionally angry and upset with the Novus Ordo. And again, he's not telling people, first of all, that he apologized for this. Second of all, he's going to indicate that this is somehow what Vatican II wants and that this is somehow normal for the Novus Ordo when it's incredibly rare. 99.99999% of Novus Ordos aren't like this. He talks about a unicorn Novus Ordo. Well, this is a unicorn Novus Ordo. What we're watching here with the floaty mass, that's a unicorn Novus Ordo. That does not happen in 99.9999% of the Novus Ordos. But it gives you the impression that this is constantly happening all the time, that this is what Vatican II wants. What I'm picking up from Taylor Marshall is that Marshall is scandalized by Pope Francis, scandalized by abuses in the Novus Ordo. He's emotionally upset, and he's just taking it out on every show that he has, basically. It's just coming out in every show. He's going after whatever he can go after to prove his point. Cognitive bias, as one priest just mentioned just moments ago on my social media. That's what we're seeing. Confirmation bias, I should say. Confirmation bias from Taylor Marshall. He's emotionally upset, so he's just going to look for something that proves his point here. And what I want to say is, look, that emotional frustration I totally share, but I've already been there. I've already gone through that phase that Taylor Marshall is going through right now. I've been through it back in 2015. He's late to the game. Taylor Marshall was oblivious to all this back when others like myself were talking about these liturgical abuses. However, that being said, I totally understand the frustration that he has. It's the approach, however, that I'm concerned with. And the viewers that he has, they're also vulnerable because they're also emotionally upset with these things, as they should be. But it's the way in which they're reacting and responding that is the problem. And it's the things that they're buying into that becomes just as problematic as this, as what we're seeing here. Just as problematic. Because it breeds this idea of dissent against the magisterium. It misrepresents the church and so on.
This is totally illicit. You're trying to tell me if I've got that or the SSPX, you can't go to the SSPX, you have to go to this because he has a piece of paper from the Archbishop of Milan?
All right, so who does this apply to? Who is it that only has access to this beach mass, which was a one-time thing that almost never happens, or the SSPX? Who is that? Does this person exist in real life? I think this is an imaginary person. This is a situation that just isn't the case. It's not the case that either you have this kind of liturgical abuse or you have the SSPX. This just simply doesn't apply to 99.99999% of people in the real world. So this is just empty rhetoric. And this is giving a false impression. Moreover, it's not between that or the SSPX. And just because you have, even if you were in the position that you only have that, it doesn't logically follow that you would go to the SSPX either. There are other solutions. There are other alternatives. And if this is what you have to go to prove the SSPX is and its cause, you're really scratching the bottom of the barrel. Don't you have better arguments for the SSPX? I can think of better arguments for the SSPX than to say, well, either you go to that or the SSPX. And then the idea is, well, are you really telling me that I have to go to this liturgy and that that's better because he has a piece of paper from the Bishop of Milan? So is that his way of denigrating communion with the Pope? Reducing it to a piece of paper? I could point him to high church Anglicans, which he used to be one, so he would know this is true. High Anglo-Catholics who would accept every dogma of the Catholic Church. They still don't think that they need to be in communion with Pope, but they accept every dogma of the Catholic Church, just like he used to be an Anglican who accepted everything in the Catechism and still had not converted yet, although it did lead to his conversion. But there are some Anglo-Catholics who have not made that step, but they're right there and they accept all the dogmas of the Catholic Church. They could also just say, okay, well, you're telling me that you can't come to my mass because I don't have a piece of paper from the Archbishop of Milan? I mean, would it apply there? No. Oh, well, you also lack holy orders. And now you start to make other distinctions. Okay. Well, can't we make some other distinctions here too? Does it really all boil down to a piece of paper? And is that all communion with the Pope really is? I think it's a really horrible argument. And it's very, again, misleading to people who are already emotionally vulnerable and disposed to buy into anything that Marshall says at this point.
Are we crazy?
I won't answer that one, but I think he raises a good question. Is he crazy?
Are we crazy? I mean, if you're a man who's afflicted with the orientation of Elton John, do you just have bad taste? Do you degrade into Elton John levels of bad taste?
And I will say I've kind of noticed that as well. There's that old school generation, like that Vatican II generation, the hippie generation. Yeah, they are. That is their style and their taste. That Elton John kind of stuff. That's always rubbed me the wrong way. And not that everybody from that generation is that way. Look, I understand we're painting with a broad brush, but what is it about that generation that breeds irreverence? What is it about them? I think what it is they were reacting against previous generations that held to greater forms of piety and reverence and art. They were reacting against their parents. It's that rebellious attitude and spirit from the hippie generation. And it bleeds over into their understanding of the arts and appreciation of the arts. That's my theory. I could be wrong about it, but that's why I think that generation tends to lack good taste in art and liturgy, in my opinion.
I honestly have no words. And if this so-called priest, padre, is not disciplined, no words.
Well, I certainly think that priests like that should be disciplined. I also think that individuals who are stirring up schism should also be disciplined. But I want to say discipline needs to be consistent all around, radical traditionalists or liberals and abuses to the liturgy. However, I do want to note it's interesting that Taylor Marshall doesn't mention anything about the apology and that the priest did not intend to be sacrilegious. So he wasn't, as one commenter put in the comment section, that, oh, I bet this priest was just trying to flaunt his liberalism in the church. And I just had to say, you know what? Actually, he apologized. So yeah, no, that isn't it. You're reading too much into this. I do think it's interesting that he doesn't mention that apology. Not that it really fixes everything, because at the end of the day, when you have liturgical abuse like that, it's good that you apologize. It's good that you kind of see, okay, that wasn't the right way, even though he has that clause about, he's the one that we saw from the article. He doesn't think everything was wrong about it. Oh, okay, that's a little problematic, but at least his heart is in the right place. He doesn't want to be sacrilegious. He realizes that it gave the wrong impression. So I'm glad to see that. But again, that doesn't fix everything, because at the end of the day, it gives people the wrong impression, and a lot of people aren't going to see that apology. So here's something from Giga Sniper. Michael, you've been so charitable towards Taylor Marshall, and all he does is ignore you. Do you think he would engage you if you just called him a non-Christian heretic blasphemer? Well, I don't think that it would be helpful to call him a heretic non-Christian blasphemer just to have him engage. I know he's aware of my content, and but yeah, he hasn't seen it necessary to engage it, and that's fine. I don't intend or think that I'm going to reach Taylor Marshall. I'm not really even concerned about trying to reach Taylor Marshall. I would be if he was more open to feedback and interaction, but I'm not doing this to reach Taylor Marshall. So I don't care about that. I'm doing this to reach the people that are being influenced by his content, who do have an open mind. Those are the ones that I want to try to reach. See, audio vacantism is gold. That's funny. Second time this has happened, but the first time I did a whole 30 minutes where my mic was muted. I don't remember what, I think the mic was not muted on the soundboard, but there was some internal setting that was messed up, and that was muted, and nobody could hear me for 30 minutes. So I then had to redo this stream. Fun stuff. Have I done a show on the SSPV and the Thuc line? No, it's so minor. It's so small that it's just, I don't know. Is it really even necessary? Let's see. He's caused many to despair and leave. Yeah, and a lot of people have also said that he's caused them to enter the church and to be strengthened in their faith. And I'm not so sure about that one, but maybe some of his older content did. But I don't think that takes away from some of the other stuff. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who say Father James Martin has strengthened their faith and caused them to enter the church. But my question is, did you enter the church for the right reasons? And are you setting yourself up to leave the church by buying into his content? It was the video where you reviewed a liberal TikTok video, the one that my microphone settings were messed up on. Was it? It was that one? I remember that liberal TikTok video. It was pretty terrible as a woman priest. I forget what she was trying to promote on there, but it was ridiculous. Favorite episode from The Office? This is a good question. Yeah, I don't know how to answer this one because there's so many of them that I like. But Scott's Tots would probably that would probably be it. Scott's Tots. I'm going with that one. Before I change my mind in 5 minutes. I nearly quit RCIA because of Taylor Marshall teaching on Vatican II, especially Lumen Gentium. By the way, go and watch my Vatican II playlist and my Magisterium playlist. That will be the antidote for that content if you haven't already seen it. All right, we'll see you later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.